When people are protesting in support of divestment, to stop a genocide, to end a war, to call for ceasefire, it's my duty to come in and try to help those people as an attorney. I took an oath to defend the Constitution. These are constitutional issues. This is the foundational core of the United States. And when prosecutors are trying to stifle that speech so that it puts an end to this type of activity, no, we have to stand up to that.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Visit sumudpod.com to subscribe and connect with us on social media. Consider supporting our work through a contribution on the Support Us page.
On this episode of the Sumud Podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Amir Makled. Amir is a Lebanese-American attorney who meets injustice head-on. He's taken on police brutality, defended the silenced, and stood beside pro-Palestinian students criminalized for their protest. When U.S. Customs and Border Protection detained and tried to intimidate him, he didn't waver. He resisted through the language of the law. And the irony that the son of Arab immigrants and a Muslim, identities this country so often surveils, silences, or suspects is the one fighting to protect the Constitution. Welcome, Amir.
Thanks for having me.
How you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you spending time with me.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks. It's a great conversation. I'm a fan of your podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot. As I was preparing for this interview, I really started to think that there was some irony here, that a Muslim and that an Arab, two categories that are often demonized or viewed as anti-constitutional or anti-free speech or even anti-American, is the very one that's defending the Constitution. Did you ever think about that irony?
I mean, yeah, it's come up, in my reflection of the work that I do. There's always this stigmatism about Arabs and Muslims, right? And it's something that is part of the Arab American experience. We feel it. We live through this. But I'm trying to challenge that stereotype. I'm trying to be part of the difference in what, the American public sees and what our community sees through my advocacy as well. My audience is generally our community. I want to be able to educate our community, the Arab and Muslim community, about the rights that we have and how to stand up and speak out against issues that are affecting our communities. And that's always been my why, as to why I'm doing things, just to try to help others.
But that has to be a little bit crazy, looking across the aisle and seeing that individual, let's just say a white guy, born and raised here as well, saying free speech, free speech, free speech, except for Palestine. And you're like, wait a minute, no, I'm going to fight this one. That's not okay.
The New York Times wrote a really good article on this just this past Sunday. There are groups like the Heritage Foundation, who is popular for writing, this Project 2025 thing that everybody talked about during the elections with Trump and how it would be a big, massive undertaking from the conservative movement in the United States to help push along some of these agenda that Trump's doing. Well, that same group put something together called Project Esther, which was designed by Zionists through the Heritage Foundation to challenge the pro-Palestinian movement in the United States. It's a very systemic, thought-after plan. It's layered in tiers, and it's exactly what the Trump administration has been implementing right now, to the T. It's the playbook. And the New York Times just wrote a big piece on this. I think people should look at that and understand that our community is, under attack. It's a systemic attack for anything that has to do with pro-Palestinian advocacy. And so we have to be prepared to stand up to this type of stuff, because the Heritage Foundation is well established and well funded and has the ear of the administration. And they found an administration that could really run with this platform that they're trying to present.
You were born and raised in Detroit, is that right?
Yes, I was born in Detroit, raised in Dearborn, and then spent most of my childhood in Dearborn. Went to high school in Northville, Michigan, which is a little further west from Dearborn. That was a big dramatic shift for me and a change, because I went from a predominantly Arab American community to a predominantly white community, and then went back to University of Michigan Dearborn for my undergrad. And so put me back in a predominantly Arab American community again after I was a little bit more, experienced and educated. That life experience really shaped how I can see the other side as well. I think that was probably the best thing my parents ever did for me, was us moving to Northville and graduating from Northville High School, which was a little bit the norm, what other Arab Americans experience outside of Dearborn. It's a blessing to be a part of this community. We're lucky to have such a strong community that really you don't feel like you're an outsider when you're living in this community. We feel like we're all, on the same track and the same path. But when you live in a community that doesn't have many Arabs or Muslims like you do feel like an outsider. And I have experienced both sides of that in my childhood and upbringing.
You grew up obviously post 9/11.
Yes.
Were you in that other area post 9/11?
That's when I first moved to Northville. I was in my freshman year of high school when 9/11 happened. And we had just moved to Northville probably that year or the year before. I was just starting to build my friendship group. I was just starting to build, my peers, the people I'd be hanging out with, my social circle. And I was an athlete. So my social circle was, other athletes. I played football. I had an experience right in my freshman year of high school. I was doing very well on the football team, and I was a team leader. I was a team captain for a good chunk of the season. And I had one of my teammates come up to me after a game and said, "I'm not listening to no Arab." And they used some profanity too. So I tackled him. I tackled him right in the middle of the field, my own teammate. And I was so mad. I'd never been discriminated against for just my identity. That had never happened to me before. And my coach lost his mind. "What's going on? What are you guys doing?" They separated us. And Northville's a little bit more affluent community. So they hired the coach from Remember the Titans, if you remember that movie, where they had the cross of a black community that was joining a white football team. And so the actual coach from Remember the Titans ended up coming to Northville to speak to me and, the rest of my teammates about unity and trying to not have discrimination among teammates. And I protested. I didn't go to the meeting because I was so offended by a lot of the conversations that I was hearing, in the locker room and otherwise. And this is, right after 9/11. And so that experience, changed my life, I'd say, feeling that way, feeling like I was an outsider. And that's when I really started to hone in on what is my identity and how do I become, somebody that can be a chameleon in this community, blend in, but not lose my identity as an Arab and Muslim. Those 4 years really taught me, what I wanted to pursue, I think.
I think Remember the Titans was actually in Alexandria, Virginia, which is
Correct.
25 minutes from me, actually. So
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What position did you play?
I was a linebacker.
Linebacker. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where you get your competitive nature from, huh?
I think so.
That's why Dana Nessel, we'll talk about her later, but that competitive spirit you got, right?
Yeah, she backed down. She didn't want to mess with me anymore, man. She put up the white flag on that one.
Yeah, I hear that. So when you were growing up, did you get the ultimatum of most Arab kids, doctor or lawyer, and you just pick lawyer? Or
No.
how did that happen? Okay.
My dad is a self-employed, self-made guy. My dad came here probably when he was 17 years old, and he was raised by his uncle because his father had passed away when he was probably 9 or 10 years old. His uncle had lived here in Dearborn for, I don't know, probably since the 50s, I'd say. And so he brought my dad over here, and his uncle, my uncle also, obviously, had established a furniture store, a furniture business, and done very well for himself. And so when my dad came here, he had work immediately. He ended up working for Ford Motor Company. A lot of people in Dearborn worked for Ford Motor Company. I think that's really what shaped our community, this blue collar type workforce. But he's not formally educated. I don't even think he went to high school. But he worked hard and made, good business decisions and ended up opening up different businesses. He had a gas station, he had a car wash, he had a collision shop. And so by the time I got into high school, his businesses had been pretty established and he'd been doing very well for himself. So he didn't want me to be a lawyer. He said, "You shouldn't go to school. We have these businesses to run. Like, what are you doing? Like, why do you want to go to law school? Why do you even want to go to college? Who's going to run the collision shop?" So that's not the typical, approach from Harrison. So it's either a doctor, a lawyer, or engineer even. No. My dad is like, "You better be at the car wash. Somebody's got to run this store." And I told him, Dad, listen, my brother took that track and he ended up going to law school later. He's older than I am. But after I went and got into law school, he decided he's going to do what I did. And so I inspired my brother as well to become an attorney. But I told my dad, listen, I have nothing to lose here. I'm going to keep going for school. And if I fail, I'll go back to the car wash or I'll go back to the collision shop. Luckily, my law school was Wayne State University, and our collision shop is on campus at Wayne State University. So that was his, okay, you can go to Wayne State, but you still got to be at the collision shop in between class. And that's what I did.
Did you hook up your friends with some free services?
I tried to help everybody I could, man. I mean, the best thing that could ever happen to me is running these small businesses, because I think that's what gave me this entrepreneurial spirit too, and knowing how to manage a law firm. See, lawyers are never taught on how to be business owners. We're taught to be lawyers. We're taught how to write briefs and advocate, oral advocacy and written advocacy. But managing a business, having employees, onboarding employees, customer relationships, building new clientele, fostering relationships, none of that's taught in law school. I mean, none of that, absolutely none of it. Noticed you interviewed Ali Awad once before. He's an attorney who has a good business acumen and is teaching other lawyers how to manage their practices and move forward in the business of law. I think that's a very good task and undertaking that he's taken. I've benefited from some of his teachings. But if I didn't have that small business experience, I think my, ability to manage my firm and pick the cases that I have would have been a lot more difficult. I would have probably been working for a firm somewhere else, and I wouldn't have had the range to take on some of these cases that I can take on, because I'm my own boss and I have my own staff and I have my own team of attorneys that work for us, with us, that are just a wonderful team that I've had for over 10 years now. And so that's been a blessing for me.
Why law school? Why be a lawyer?
So when I was at U of M Dearborn, I was in the business with my parents, with my dad. I ended up going to the School of Business at the University of Michigan in Dearborn. I took finance as my undergrad. I graduated in 08 or 09. Is like at the peak of the Great Recession or whatever that was at that time, when the housing market had tanked, jobs were obsolete. And U of M Dearborn was good at placing people into the automotive market, the big three, the suppliers. That was the track from that university. So I applied to work at General Motors. I got an interview with a contractor for General Motors. So not for General Motors directly, for a contract firm, like a staffing company. And it was in some office tower in Troy, Michigan. And it was just like a small cubicle. And it was really just a depressing type environment. I sat in this interview, and then they told me, okay, we're going to hire you. This is where you're going to work. And I just looked at this and I said, man, I'd rather be at the car wash drying cars than doing this for the rest of my life. I'm not going to do this. So I said, thanks, no thanks. I took my LSAT and I applied to law school. I said, maybe by the time I finish law school, the economy will do a little bit better and I'll have a better opportunity somewhere else. So going to law school was really me avoiding getting into the workforce at a time when the workforce was really bad. And it wasn't something that was exciting. It was a way to hide under, I'm still in school, leave me alone. Like one of those things. Yes. But when I got into law school at Wayne State, I met a professor, Professor Hammer, who is the
Wait, that's like the best name for a law professor, right?
He's awesome.
Yeah.
He ended up really showing me what civil rights meant. And then as a law student, I ended up working for a law firm who is the partner I'm with now, Attorney Cyril Hall, who is a Black attorney. At the time was probably almost 40 years. He's been practicing for close to 50 years now. He'd been a veteran attorney in the civil rights area, and I ended up going under his wing. So the mentorship that I received from Cyril, my partner, and from Professor Hammer, who is the head of the Damon Keith Center for Civil Rights at Wayne Law, really was part of my coaching tree and kind of molded, what I wanted to do with my practice and what I wanted to do with my career.
Why did Cyril take a liking to you specifically?
So Cyril had practiced in Pontiac, Michigan, which was a predominantly Black community for the majority of his career. Pontiac is another one of those towns that had a General Motors factory. Everybody in the town was employed by General Motors. So it was a good blue-collar town that had good employment and a pretty good economy for itself. And Cyril was working with an attorney named Albert Hatchett, who was also a rock star civil rights attorney in his era, which is the late 60s, early 70s. Albert Hatchett filed a lawsuit against the city of Pontiac for the Pontiac busing case, which was a seminal case that desegregated the public school system in Pontiac, Michigan.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they got a lot of civil rights type cases that came through their firm. And that carried on into Cyril's practice later on. And so by the late 90s, Cyril had been on his own practicing in Pontiac, but the market, the legal market, wasn't as good anymore because that factory, the General Motors factory, had shut down. And so people didn't have as much money to hire attorneys anymore. And so his client base was very difficult. You know, he was now taking on cases that weren't so lucrative anymore because people didn't have the money to hire lawyers. However, he was getting a good chunk of business from Dearborn. He had a client who was a jobber. You know, a jobber is somebody that is a fuel supplier. And it's an Arab American guy who really sent him a lot of work to Pontiac. So he wanted to open a satellite office in Dearborn. And he decided to do that. And at the same time, that's when I walked into his office. And, you know, that same person who was a fuel supply hauler brought me into his firm. And, you know, I was the figure he needed to break into the community in Dearborn.
But if I were to ask him, what about Amir really struck you? I mean, he's not going to just hand that to anybody. There must have been something about you. Maybe it was just your competitive nature. Maybe it was because you're a former linebacker. I don't know. But something motivated him.
I think that I looked at him as a father figure and I gave deference to him. And I still do. Right before we started this interview, I was in his office right now and he was giving me some fatherly advice. And so I think that relationship wasn't like a business partner or senior partner versus, you know, junior associate. It was a mentor-mentee type relationship, you know, that became very personal between he and I. We would spend, you know, our first office was, and now we're in a bigger firm in a bigger building in a different part of town, but we were right in the smack of East Dearborn, which is really the main hub of Arab America in Dearborn. You know, I would stay in the office till 7, 8 o'clock at night, just talking to him about civil rights issues. He would talk to me about all the things that he had to deal with judges and discrimination that he faced as a Black attorney going into a predominantly white jurisdiction in Oakland County, where he spent most of his career in. Oakland County is a more affluent community in Southeast Michigan, and most of his cases and trials were in that jurisdiction. And so he would teach me on how to try a case to a white jury when you had a Black defendant or an Arab defendant, and why we would try to, you know, pick a jury that could be more sensitive to some of these issues. And so that was a unique experience that I don't think I would have been able to pick up anywhere else. And, you know, on top of it, I was able to bring a lot of business into the office. Even as a law student, I was bringing in a lot of cases. And I think that one day I walked in and my name was on the wall. I mean, I didn't ask to be a partner. He just did it. I didn't have to buy in or do anything. It was sweat equity, I think. But, you know, it was a good balance. It was something that I think the timing was right for him and myself. I think he wanted to re-energize his career and I wanted to start my career. And it was a good mix.
You're about to encourage a group of attorneys to go to their partners and say, hey, put my name on the wall.
The thing is, I never asked for that. And that's, I think, another reason why he got to liking me, because I didn't put any pressure on him. You know, initially, when I got hired on as an associate attorney, I didn't even want a salary. I said I would, you know, eat what I kill. I'm going to bring in business for the firm and, you know, we'll have a split situation. And that's what we did, you know, because I didn't want to be tied down to whatever they gave me. I wanted to bring in what I wanted to handle.
Yeah. So you're a different breed.
I guess so.
Yeah. I want to ask about some of your cases, but your parents, are they proud of you? I mean, you're doing some important things here.
Yeah, I think they're very proud. My dad, you know, there's a website that's called vintagevel.org, and that's news from South Lebanon, right? And so early part of my career, I had a case where a young lady was pulled over by the Dearborn Heights Police Department. She's a Muslim woman, wears a hijab, and she had a suspended license. And they arrested her and removed her hijab as part of the mugshot when she was driving without a license. And so I sued the city of Dearborn Heights and was able to change that policy. And it made national news. Like, I was all over the place. But my dad didn't care about that. When vintagebail.org wrote the article about me, he lost his, you're on vintagebail.org. That's his proud moment. So to, to him, it was important to see that. So I always think that's hilarious that, being in the top of the USA Today news wasn't a big deal to him, but vintagebail.org was. But yeah, I could say he's quite proud. He tells me all the time.
Well, that's his hometown, right?
Yeah, we're right
Yeah.
next to it.
Right next to it. Yeah. No, that's powerful. That has to feel very good and be a very good experience for you overall.
I mean, I'm blessed to have a good upbringing with my family. I've traveled to different parts of the country doing seminars for lawyers. And part of these seminars are really introspective, where you're trying to get to know yourself and you hear other people's stories, a lot of, mommy issues or daddy issues. And I never had that experience. And I don't know if it's because, in the Arab community, we don't feel that way. Maybe it's the multi-generational type upbringing that we have, where it's very rooted in family. But, we had a wonderful relationship growing up. Like we always, were together. We always ate dinner together. My parents hung out together all the time. And I saw that growing up. And, my mom and dad would go for a drive every night. They'd stop at a Tim Hortons, grab a cup of coffee, and just drive around. And that was their alone time.
Yeah.
And so they still do that to this day. It's something that I looked up to, and I thought that was really important.
So here's a true test of an Arab dad, okay? Did he admit to you that you made the right call in not going into the family business and being an
Never.
attorney? You never, huh?
Never. Now going back, he ended up selling his business and he only has one left, from all his other businesses. I said, why are you selling these businesses? Let my brother and I run them. No, you guys are lawyers. You didn't want to do this. You guys. So he sold them all.
Yeah, that's very cool. Early on in your career, I think 2014, you defended an individual. His name was Ali Beydoun. I think he was a mentally disabled Arab American that was beaten by Dearborn police.
Yes.
Can you talk about that case, why you took it, and how you sort of navigated that whole experience?
So, yeah, that's taken me back some time. That was a very important case to me. And again, that was when my office was on Warren Avenue, which is in the deepest part of the Arab American neighborhood of Dearborn. And so Ali was riding his bicycle right past my office when he ended up being stopped for what the Dearborn police said is running a stop sign on a bicycle, which was ridiculous to me. He didn't have an understanding as to what this officer wanted from him. He didn't speak English very well at all. And this officer was demanding his ID and doing different things. And the guy kept telling him, no English. And he was, developmentally challenged. He was a little slow. I knew him because he was a dishwasher at a restaurant across the street from where my office was. And so when this happened, his mother came to us and said, my son has been arrested. They ended up actually taking him to the hospital after they beat him, and they released him. They just left him in the hospital. So that was a big deal because the community had always been saying that the Dearborn police hadn't had enough hires to police the Arab community. We haven't had enough Arabic-speaking police officers. We don't have enough officers from the Dearborn community. We don't have enough training on how to deal with people with mental health issues. These have been conversations that the community had been raising to that police chief at the time and the elected officials. At that point in Dearborn, we were right before the flip when the Arab American population really started to take form in city government. So it was still the old guard, which was predominantly white and racist. Dearborn historically had a racist type political upbringing. We had, Mayor Hubbard, who was known nationally as a staunch segregationist. He would put signs all across the city of Dearborn that said, keep Dearborn clean. People knew that meant keep Dearborn white. And he would speak to national publications about being anti-Black. And he didn't want Dearborn to look like Detroit or other suburb cities of Detroit where they had become more Black, predominantly Black. So Dearborn had that historically racist upbringing, and the police kept it. So when this happened, we made a lot of noise about this. And we've been saying, see, this is exactly why we need, more Arabic police officers. This is exactly why we need training for sensitivity for people with mental illness. That officer ended up getting fired. And we ended up suing the city, and they paid him a substantial sum, Ali. And that was a good thing. But it did make a lot of noise in the community. People were very upset.
What did that make you feel, or how did you view the lack of police accountability in general at that time?
I'm trying to remember if Ferguson happened after that or before that. But if you remember the Ferguson riot, when police, had been really targeting predominantly black community in Ferguson in Missouri, I believe. It was around that era when we were, making this push to change the demographic of our police force that understood what the needs of the community is. Because you had people that would be calling the police, and the police couldn't communicate with members of the community. They would walk into homes in the south end of Dearborn or in the east end of Dearborn, and they couldn't talk to the woman that's trying to say, hey, my husband's beating me up, or somebody had stolen my son's bike, or whatever the issue was. They didn't know how to communicate at all with members of the community. And that case really put it up at the forefront. So I started, giving interviews to the Arab American News and talking about this issue. And the publisher from the Arab American News, Osama Sablani, was writing a lot of articles on this and putting pressure on the local police department and the administration from the city of Dearborn. They were embarrassed. The city was embarrassed, but the police were not. They started targeting my firm. I remember when I was doing a press conference for that case, I had all the local news channels in my conference room. Dearborn police had lined up 5 or 6 cruisers in front of my office just as an intimidation. And then when I would do the deposition of an officer, they would bring all 11 police officers to the deposition in uniform and sit there as a way to try to intimidate me. And I would laugh at them. I'd be like, there's other crimes that are happening in the city. The best use of our city's resources to sit and listen to my deposition of one of your officers, no problem. That's fine.
But they had to have known that was going to backfire given your personality.
Well, I think people were testing me at that point in my career. And I was still building my, I don't know what the term is, I guess my acumen, in Arabic, it's khillet. How much khillet do you have? They were testing me.
You also later, or is it before, is it Ali Neji, who was shot by Dearborn police inside a police station?
That was a case that we did more recently. That was, I think, last year or the year before. Another issue with somebody who has mental health concerns. Ali is somebody that had lived his whole life developmentally challenged and had some mental health issues. And he walked in one day on a Sunday near middle of December and walked into the Dearborn Police Department with a gun that he had stolen from one of his former employees, a barbershop. He had worked at a barbershop sweeping up floors. And so he took this gun from his previous employer and walked into the Dearborn Police Department. He didn't even know how to use this thing. He didn't even know what to do with it, but he pointed that weapon at the officer that's sitting at the desk behind a bulletproof enclosed desk. So there's a bulletproof window. And so Ali's in the lobby, maybe about 15 or 20 feet away from the counter where the officer sits. And there's a bulletproof glass. The officer sees it, starts yelling out, gun, 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 gun. But the officer doesn't try to disengage or try to de-escalate Ali. He escalates the situation. He opens the bulletproof glass and starts shooting at Ali and puts 17 rounds in him, killing him instantly. It was all on tape, and it was a very difficult case because everybody made this thing that it was, suicide by a cop. That's how they tried to spin it.
Everybody in the community or everybody in the white community?
In the white community. In the Arab community, they said, why did he get shot 17 times? Why didn't you tell him relax? Why didn't you try to de-escalate it? You were behind bulletproof glass. What caused you to open up that bulletproof window and engage him with firearms? We knew coming in, this was going to be a difficult case because something called qualified immunity. Law enforcement are immune from lawsuits when they're working within the scope of their employment. The federal judges, all the way to the Supreme Court, have always said that you cannot sue any governmental employee or police officer when they're working under the color of the law and in the line of their duty, unless there's been an intentional or extreme violation or negligence in the course of their employment. And so in this situation, the city responded to the lawsuit immediately with a motion to dismiss, saying that this police officer is immune from lawsuit. We deposed the officer, and we were able to question as to why he opened the bulletproof glass. And I was able to show that this isn't the first time somebody walked into the lobby with a gun. There was a group of white men that walked into the Dearborn Police Department as a show of protest once before, wearing long rifles on their chest and bulletproof vests. And they were filming this for YouTube live as a kind of show of the Second Amendment and their rights. And this officer happened to be sitting at that desk that day. He didn't discharge his weapon that day. He made them get down to the ground and remove their firearms. But when Ali walked in, I think that officer, and this is just my belief, said, not again. I'm not allowing somebody to walk into this department with a gun. This time I'm going to take some action. I believe that he made that split-second choice to engage Ali and shoot him. That was what my gut told me happened in this situation. But the federal judge decided that, because the weapon was pointed at the officer, that was enough for an officer to engage a citizen. And I can understand that argument, but I don't understand it when there's a bulletproof glass in between them and he opens the bulletproof glass and puts himself in that position. I appealed that to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Sixth Circuit upheld the court's ruling on me. So that case ended up being dismissed for qualified immunity. But that is another example of some of this judicial created type defenses for law enforcement and government. That's not a statutory defense. The courts created qualified immunity. And it's something that we still have to face in every civil rights case that we bring against the government, is the issue of qualified immunity. It's the first hurdle that we have to overcome. And it's a difficult one. But, thankfully, a lot of times we're able to overcome it when there's really serious violations.
Yeah. So those first two cases, you're a hero in the Arab community. People are happy you're defending them, you're doing the right thing. But you later take a case at some point, maybe before this last one, Nasser Bazi, in a sexual assault case.
Yeah.
You took a lot of heat because of that.
I did.
But I do want to say for the audience, the point here before you sort of jump in is you're going to always defend someone's right to a fair trial, no matter what the situation is.
I get often asked, how do you do criminal defense work when, that person could be guilty of a crime? How do you stand up? How do you sleep at night knowing you're defending somebody who could have committed a sexual assault, in this case that you brought up, a homicide, and other cases that I've done in the community, and you know that somebody had committed that crime and you're standing advocating for that person? What's your thought process on that? My response is, look, everybody has the right to a fair trial and fair representation. These are very difficult cases, and the government has a lot of power in terms of their investigatory approach, their tactics, the ability to arrest somebody and take their liberty away, and use warrant powers to go into your house, take your electronic devices, rummaging through all sorts of the most intrusive things to get information to try to prosecute you. But if they're doing it in violation of the law, that should be more important to somebody than defending somebody who could be guilty of a crime. Because the government has a lot more power than any one individual. And, in order to stand up against the government, you need to have an advocate that understands the law and can level the playing field. Because to me, it's more important that I will have one guilty person go free than have an innocent person convicted. That's a far worse situation in my eyes. Because a guilty person that gets away, believe me, they'll get caught up again. These folks are going to end up being repeat customers. This is how the system works, man. This is how, the energy in the world is. You'll get yours eventually. Karma will catch up to that person if they get off on a technicality or something, or it'll be a serious lesson for them. A lot of times if I'm doing a drunk case and somebody's pulled over and the cop, violated their rights on searching their vehicle and they find drugs in the car, I'm able to get that case dismissed. You didn't have the right to search, and that shouldn't be used against that person. And, they walk away. But hey, they had drugs. What do you mean? Shouldn't they be convicted? No, the government should have did their job right from the beginning, and then they should have won. Had they done their job right, they would get conviction, but they take shortcuts. And that other case with the sexual assault, those are the most difficult cases to take as an attorney, especially a lawyer like myself who's a community lawyer. My practice is very community-based. It's difficult to take on cases where there's going to be a lot of contention from within the community. This was a case where a gentleman was charged with sexual assault of his nieces. Very difficult facts, very difficult case. Why would a young girl come in and lie? And so we wanted to raise awareness as to what the reasons people come later, 10 years later, and bring up issues of sexual assault and, really try to put up a defense for these individuals. But it's not about whether or not he's guilty or innocent. To me, it's about standing up for your right to fair trial, an ability to present a defense in open court. And if the person's guilty, the government should win. That's how the system is, And so you want to have an attorney that understands you. This particular client chose my firm because he understood me and I understood him. He could have gone to a white firm, could have gone to any other firm, but they wouldn't have had that same connection. And he wouldn't have felt that same comfort. And ultimately, that person was convicted. He's out of prison now. And in fact, he came and visited me when he came out of prison. He served his time. And when he came out, he came and sat with me in my office right here just a few months ago. And we had a long conversation. And he's a changed man as a result of this.
Do you have to believe that the person is innocent? I know it's a tricky question.
Generally, I don't ask, did you do it? Because it doesn't change the defense for me. I'm looking at how was this case investigated? I'm looking at what evidence does the prosecutor have to try to convict. I'm looking at, does the evidence that they have, was it one, legally obtained? And two, if it is legally obtained, how is it going to be presented in this case to fit the elements of this crime? And that's the way I'm looking at these defenses for criminal cases. I don't ask the client if he did it or she did it. It doesn't change much to me. If the client wants to volunteer that information to me and say, look, man, I messed up. This is what I did, 1, 2, and 3. Just try to help me. I'll try to use other mitigation strategies to try to give them at least a second chance. Maybe somebody needs to go through rehab. Maybe there's an underlying drug issue that this person has, and that's the reason why he keeps getting in trouble or she keeps getting in trouble. Maybe there's some trauma in their life that put this person in this position that keeps not able to conform with the law and what society requires of us. So, those are different things that are mitigation strategies that we need to bring up. I have a client right now that I'm representing. He's a young man, Arab American, is a veteran, went to war for the United States, came back and is committing a lot of crimes. He can't assimilate into our society. He's having a tough time from the trauma he experienced by serving our country. Is that fair that he be sent to prison? Or should we be treating him and try to get him back into society in a way where we can fix the root cause? I have clients that have drug issues. Is it fair that they end up going to prison? Sometimes people need to go to prison, don't get me wrong. But shouldn't we try to rehabilitate that person first if it's warranted? Those I think are more humanistic approach to individuals. And that's the type of strategy that I take when somebody does tell me I did it.
Speaking of someone who said that they did it, Samantha Lewis unequivocally admits that there was a protest that they are fighting for Palestine. Samantha and was it 10 others charged with a felony because of peaceful protests? Is that right?
So Samantha is an activist. Samantha is part of a group of young adults who are staunchly pro-Palestinian and were demanding divestment at the University of Michigan. And she was one of the main organizers for the encampment in May of last year. In fact, it's actually been 1 year to date when that encampment was busted up by campus safety and campus police at the University of Michigan. Today is the 1 year anniversary of that. And so Samantha was engaged in this encampment. Now, encampments across the country had been occurring. And again, we go back to that Esther project I spoke about earlier. It's part of a systemic approach to trying to stifle the pro-Palestinian speech on campuses. This is a big deal for the Zionist movement because the campus protest and campus dissent is where ideas are formed and where people are going to be going into society, maybe having been given a different approach or a different perspective on Israel than what they've have seen in the past. Now we're saying people are open to this issue. Like, why is the Palestinian issue so serious? Why is there a double standard? Why are we saying that you can't come in and take land in Ukraine, but in Gaza it's no big deal, or in the West Bank it's no big deal? So these issues are being really debated at the campus level. It's the most offensive to the Zionist movement. With that being said, Samantha was one of the main organizers of the encampment, and these are not protests where there's vandalism occurring. They're not disrupting the flow of the curriculum at the University of Michigan. It's in what's called the Diag, which is kind of the center campus. And it's in a part of the campus where historically protest and political speech has been displayed, from the Vietnam era to the South Africa apartheid era to the voting rights and civil rights era for Black students. This happened time and time again at the Diag. It's always there. But never have they came in, stopped a protest in the showing of force that they did in this situation. The campus safety police came in full riot gear, probably 40 uniformed riot gear officers with bulletproof vests, face shields, batons, and mace, and just marched into this encampment and busted up everything that was in their way, including the students and activists who were engaging in this peaceful protest at 5:30 in the morning. They were called over the loudspeaker, and they said they had 10 minutes to leave. In 5 minutes, they started walking into the encampment and busting it up. They didn't even give them that 10 minutes. And so when somebody got in their way, oh, you're resisting an officer, you're going to be arrested. So that's why we said this is the criminalization of free speech. At 5:30 in the morning, there's nothing going on. They had been there for almost 30 days. No one had been out, saying free Palestine at 5 a.m. They were sleeping in the tents. And so even if they were, it's not a crime. What we found to be quite interesting is when these charges were ultimately brought, they were brought several months later by Dana Nessel, the Attorney General of the state of Michigan, who is the most progressive Attorney General that Michigan has ever seen. She is somebody who has been a huge supporter for rights, for individual rights. Before she became an Attorney General, she represented a gay couple and was able to fight that case, I think, to the United States Supreme Court for gay marriage rights. And, she is a huge person on individual rights. And we supported her. The Arab American community supported her. I supported her. I went to fundraisers at my friends' homes. I went to fundraisers at my friends' businesses. I collected and raised money for her campaign. I knew Dana before she became the Attorney General as a practicing prosecuting attorney in Wayne County. And we all liked her. Once she got elected, she made some very good hires from within the Arab American community. She hired Fadwa Hammoud, who became Michigan's first Arab American Solicitor General, meaning she gets to argue on behalf of the state of Michigan in the United States Supreme Court. And Fadwa was able to do that and did get that chance to argue in the U.S. Supreme Court, and she won on behalf of the state of Michigan. And as an Arab and Muslim female, the community was boisterous in how proud they were of her. But Dana is the one that gave Fadwa that opportunity. And so after October 7, it flipped. She didn't come to our community for support anymore. She didn't come to us and knock on our doors for donations. She didn't want anything to do with us. She instead became really hostile towards the community and took it upon herself to try to solicit the prosecution of these student protesters, usually on a trespass ticket or resisting and opposing a police officer. Local prosecutors take that, a city attorney, a county prosecutor. Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, doesn't get involved in that type of activity, generally, historically. But in this situation, she did. And she was very involved in the investigation of these students, to the point where she had private investigators looking after these students. And then it came out that she had written a letter to the University of Michigan on May 24th, just 2 days after the encampment had been busted up. She wrote a letter to the general counsel for the university and the vice president of the university, his name is Tim Lynch, where she was soliciting these cases. She said, don't go to the county prosecutor, don't go to the city attorney, I want them. And she wrote in that letter that she had a specialized expertise in the cross-section of the First Amendment and criminal activity, meaning she's an expert on the criminalization of free speech. That's what that letter said. So we had that in our back pocket. We knew we had gotten that letter through one of these groups did a FOIA, and there was an investigative journalist by the name of Thomas Perkins from The Guardian and Drop Site News, who had done a deep dive into Dana's political contributions from and connections to the regents at the University of Michigan. Some of the main supporters of Dana Nessel were members of the University of Michigan Board of Regents who were pushing to get these students out of the DIAG, and they really wanted help in getting these students out and busting up this encampment. So they tapped Dana's shoulder saying, hey, can you help us get rid of these students? Because they were demanding divestment, and the regents didn't want to divest, clearly. And so we had a lot more information about that as well. We were able to use that in court. I have filed a motion to disqualify Dana. The other attorneys were all volunteer lawyers, by the way, from the National Lawyers Guild. And some of the attorneys were really hesitant in filing a motion to disqualify another prosecutor. It's not something that, we usually do in the practice of criminal defense cases. But we had enough information to show that this wasn't the norm from a prosecutor. This didn't make sense. It didn't pass the smell test for me. So we had thought about that strategy in the beginning of the defense, but we didn't execute on it until that investigative journalist gave me a little bit of a tip. He said, there is a filing from the city of Hamtramck, which is another city in Michigan that is predominantly Arab and Muslim, Bangladeshi citizens and Muslim citizens, and Yemeni. And Dana had asked to be recused from investigating some members of the city council in Hamtramck. She wrote this herself. Her office asked to recuse herself because she didn't want to have the appearance of impropriety or bias towards Arabs and Muslims. And she raised the issue of the protester cases as being an example as to she didn't want to be seen as targeting specific communities. So she asked for another prosecuting agency to come in and investigate whatever was happening in Hamtramck, not related to protest activity, some other stuff like election law violations or something else. I don't know what it was. So I said, wait a minute. How could you say you're biased or have the appearance of impropriety in the Hamtramck case and then cite our case, the protester cases, but not be biased in the actual protester case? That's when I said, no, I'm filing this motion to disqualify. This is enough. So we did it.
Disqualified, just for the audience, is the same as requesting for her to recuse herself, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
It's asking the court to force her to be recused.
Okay.
That's what we were looking to do. And that was a strong pressure tactic on Dana. It hit a nerve. It hit a nerve big time. She thought we was anti-Semitic. She said, oh, because I'm Jewish, that's the only reason why they filed this, that a Jewish person couldn't conceivably be able to prosecute a Palestinian, which is really nonsense. Then missed the boat of our motion. We didn't raise that issue at all. But she spun it that way. And the judge was very interested in our motion. We had a hearing on it and was really about to grant an evidentiary hearing on this. He wanted to get into the facts of this. How did it come that your office took this case? Why is the Attorney General actually prosecuting protesters? Historically, have you ever done that? The judge had some real questions on this and granted evidentiary hearing, which would have opened the door to discovery. It would have opened the door to conversations that Dana could have had with the Board of Regents, maybe other groups, maybe AIPAC, maybe, this Heritage Foundation, maybe like this Canary Foundation, maybe Batar, all of these groups that are out there on a national level that are communicating with elected officials that would have been exposed. And I'm confident that Dana has had those conversations with at least some of those groups. And I think that she got worried about opening the door to that, and she just dismissed the cases.
You went straight for it, huh? You were trying to end it right off the bat.
Went for the jugular. It didn't even get past the preliminary exam stage, which is really the easiest burden for a prosecutor to make. The preliminary exam stage is the preliminary hearing of a criminal case. Is there probable cause that this crime could have been committed? And is there probable cause that these individuals could have committed a crime? That's all the standard is at a preliminary exam. Is there some facts that protests got violent or something? Whatever their theory was, I didn't even understand their theory as to what, where the resisting and opposing came for a police officer. They were getting beat up by cops, and they're being charged for resisting. So whatever that meant. But it didn't even get to that point in the case. She just dismissed it. She didn't want the heat anymore.
Yeah. I would have loved to have been in the room when she got that request or whatever, however it works. I'm not an attorney.
When she got the filing.
Yeah.
Well, she had sent her highest staff members to litigate this case. So it wasn't like a standard assistant attorney general that is like, run of the mill case. We're going to send this guy to go prosecute it. No, she sent top guard to come and prosecute these cases. And I don't think that their heart was in it. The folks that were actually the litigators on this case, I don't suspect that their hearts were in this litigation. They didn't want to prosecute these activists and students. I really didn't believe that they liked it.
And you took this case pro bono, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
What made you do that?
So I have always had a soft spot for criminal cases that involve civil rights issues. And this particular case was very close to home for me because we had been witnessing the genocide and we had been witnessing everything that's happening in Palestine and in South Lebanon and in Yemen and all over the Middle East. This was very painful for everybody to witness, and this continues to this day. So when people are protesting in support of divestment, to stop a genocide, to end a war, to call for ceasefire, and they're arrested for that, young adults, activists, students, it's my duty to come in and try to help those people as an attorney. I mean, I took an oath to defend the Constitution when I took an oath to become an attorney in the state of Michigan. And these are constitutional issues. These are issues of speech. These are issues of the right to assemble. These are issues of the ability to challenge government, challenge power. This is what our country is built on. This is the foundational core of the United States. And when prosecutors are trying to stifle that speech or create a chilling effect so that it puts an end to this type of activity, no, we have to stand up to that. We cannot just lay down. I can't just be on Instagram and keep sharing videos and say, oh, well, I'm with the cause. I do this for a living. I'm walking into court and I'm standing tall and I'm going to help people. And I rallied a group of lawyers that were like-minded with myself. And as a group, we defended these individuals from our hearts. We didn't care about the pocketbook. I mean, that didn't mean anything to us.
Speak of it, Instagram, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I think I saw a post where it said Amir 2, Nessel 0, like you're 2-0 against her.
So that was Sammy. Sammy actually posted that and she collaborated with me on that. Yeah. So Samantha's very excited that this case is now behind her. And I think that's her form of expressing that she wants to, feel a little bit better about herself because this was very traumatic for her. This experience of being charged with felonies, she didn't get charged with just one. She got charged with 2 felonies for 2 different protests. She was charged at the encampment, and then she was charged with something called the Festival, which is another festival at the University of Michigan that happens in August. She and a group of her friends had symbolically dressed with like blood and, they looked like they were dead, right? And they called it the die-in. And so they symbolically laid on the floor in the middle of this festival as a showing of protest. And there were counter protesters at this, festival protest. So people who were on the other side of this, pro-Israeli protesters. Samantha gets arrested. The counter protesters don't. It was clearly selective enforcement. What was Samantha doing that's illegal? Laying on the floor and dressed as somebody who looks to be dead. That's a symbolic demonstration. There's no crime in that. You're laying on the ground in a public space. There's no violation of law in that situation. Why did they come in and arrest these individuals? And why didn't they attack or disassemble the counter protesters? And so we didn't even get to court on that case. She was arraigned, and I strategically put that case out a couple months. My schedule all of a sudden became very busy when the court said, when are you available? I said, I'm pretty busy. I'm not going to be available till about June, Your Honor. So they put it out to June because I wanted to fight the other case first, the encampment case.
Yeah.
And so when we got the encampment case done, she summarily dismissed the festival case. And Dana did it in a secretive way. She didn't call me. Her office didn't reach out and say, hey, we're going to enter a motion to dismiss, blah, blah, blah. I had no idea that the cases were dropped until somebody called me and said, "Hey, did you know this case was dismissed today?" I had to call the court myself and ask. And they said, "Yeah, we'll send you the filing." What a way to stick your tail between your legs and run the other way. And so Sammy made that post really, I think, as a show of expression to herself, and maybe to, with her peer group, maybe feel a little bit better about what she's been having to deal with. But she's a great person with a great heart. And I was honored to help her and represent her and the other students as well, and activists, because they're not all students. Just a great group of young adults.
Had you not stepped up, and I don't know the area that well or the different players specifically in Michigan or on campus, had you not stepped up, would somebody else have done it, do you believe?
Oh, yeah. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. In the Metro Detroit area, our bar, the state bar, and especially the criminal bar, is very like-minded, similar to how I feel. When rights are being violated, the criminal bar steps up. The National Lawyers Guild is an association that has been, the go-to for standing up for protest activity for many years in the Detroit area. And they have a long list of volunteer lawyers. But they called me specifically on this case because they knew my track record. They knew how I felt, and they knew that I was very vocal. And they were the ones that tapped my shoulder and said, "We need you to do this." And I said, "Of course." There was no doubt in my mind. And I had done a couple other protester cases during the Black Lives Matter movement. It's not just a Palestinian issue. It's all protest speech to me. I'm not just some activist lawyer that's out here. No, I'm an attorney that stands up for rights. And this is our right.
Yeah.
There was a guy that came to Dearborn years and years ago when I was in law school. His name was Pastor Terry Jones. You ever heard of this guy?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so Terry Jones is part of a really offshoot church somewhere in like the Everglades of Florida. Okay. And this guy was burning Qur'ans. That was his claim to fame. Just a real jerk. Okay. And he wanted to come to Dearborn and burn the Quran. And the city went nuts. They said, "Who is this guy to come over here and incite this type of violence and riot stuff?" So the city of Dearborn said, "Okay, if you're going to come and do this, you can only protest or do this sign of protest in these specific areas, in front of City Hall or in front of the courthouse." And he wanted to do it in front of the biggest mosque in the state on Ford Road at the Islamic Center of America. And they said, "No, you're not allowed to do that." So I don't stand for burning Qurans. I don't stand for people who are exhibiting hate speech, as this guy was. But I do believe that you should be able to protest anywhere on a public space. I didn't agree with the city to say you can only protest here or protest there. I took approach that you can protest anywhere. And I made that a public statement. And people say, "How are you standing up for Terry Jones, man?" I said, "I'm not standing up for Terry Jones. I'm standing up for the right to protest in front of my house, from my bedroom, from the street, from this place or that place. If there is a public place, I don't have to be put in a speech zone. That's not right. And that shouldn't be what the law is." And sure enough, Dearborn police forced him to protest in front of the courthouse or City Hall or whatever he did. He sued the city. He won. He got paid. The city paid him. So, I guess I was right in the law now.
Well, I mean, I think it takes courage for you to be consistent, right? No matter the situation, whether it's your own people, whether it's not, you're really honoring the law no matter what. And I think it's difficult for people to fully comprehend that.
That is the difficult part, because people are emotional a lot of times. And I think emotions always get in the way of logical reasoning, which is why I try to be a very patient person in my practice and in my home life. Because if you don't have patience and you're not able to critically think about these issues before you have a gut or knee-jerk reaction or an instinctive type of reflex, then you can run afoul of what's right. I think that, we have to be really strategic. And I think now, more than ever, our community, the urban Muslim community nationally, is a lot more organized. We have a lot more young professionals, and now guys that are senior professionals, people that are older than me. I'm almost 40. I'll be 40 in a year and a half. But people in their 50s and 60s that are very, educated and understand the system. This is the first time I think our community can really step up and change, nationally, legislatively, and through strategic litigation in the courts. And I think that we need to be the ones at the forefront challenging issues that impact our community through strategic litigation, as opposed to waiting for the ACLU or other civil rights organizations to do that for us. And so, I've talked to many lawyers across the country. We try to live by that.
First of all, get ready, because when you hit 40, getting out of bed is a little bit different. Just
I agree. So I've heard.
yeah, a little more achy, knees are cracking. Just be ready for that. So you're working on all these different cases. And the way I sort of envision this in my head is like, you spoke to your wife, hey, let's take the kids, let's go on vacation, let's get out of here. I'm sure you're burned out. Many of us are, obviously, with everything going on and all the different initiatives that we're working on.
Yeah.
Did you know you were going to be a target?
No, not at all. So you're exactly right. You really even struck a nerve when you said burnt out, because I always get scared that I'm going to get burnt out, like to the point where I just don't want to practice anymore, because I know people that have felt that way. So I try to take these breaks with the kids and really have those core memories for them, because kids remember traveling. When I was a kid, I don't remember what the hell I did. I remember every vacation.
Yeah.
I try to get the girls, on every break to go somewhere. We went to the Dominican Republic during their spring break, and this was a few months ago. 6 days, great vacation. We had a great time. I get back to Detroit Metro Airport, 7 p.m. Sunday. I'm landing in Detroit. My dad's waiting for me outside of the airport to take us home. I get to customs. I'm wearing this hat. It's got a feather in it. I'm still on beach mode, and so
we're going to use that image as a cover for the podcast. Yeah. Just for you.
And so I'm walking through customs, and this agent says, is there a TTRT agent here? And I didn't know what the heck a TTRT agent was. And I'm like, I Google it. Tactical Terrorism Response Team. I said, oh man, I'm about to get stopped. So I tell my wife, I said, they're going to stop me. She said, what do you mean? I said, watch, they're going to pull me in for secondary screening. And, sure enough, a guy comes from another room and says, follow me, sir. And my wife and kids were taken into a secondary screening room. And this is a room that, they have my passports, my whole family's passports at this point. And it's a locked room. So like when you open the door, you have to be let out by, CBP, Customs and Border Protection. Otherwise, an alarm will go off. And so they had me sitting in this room for about 20 minutes or so, the wife and kids and I, and she's all nervous. And my daughter's like, what's going on? And I'm telling them, don't worry about it. I'll deal with it. It's not a big deal. And eventually somebody comes out. He said, Mr. Makled? I said, yes. We have some questions for you. Will you follow me to an interview room? I said, well, are my wife and kids free to leave? And they said, do they have their passports? I said, no, you guys have their passports. So we'll give them your passports. Yeah, they can leave. So at that point, my dad hat comes off, lawyer hat comes on. I'm like, great. I tell the wife, go. My dad's waiting outside. Just go home. And the kids got school tomorrow. She didn't want to leave, but I forced her to, because I'm going to be here for hours. I had clients who had been stopped at the border before. So I was familiar with the type of questions that they have. I've been involved in, confronting government agents for a majority of my career. I know how to talk to law enforcement. So when they left, they take me into this smaller interview room, and he tells me, we know you're taking on some of these high profile cases. We know about the activist cases you're doing, and we know that you're an attorney. I said, okay, great. Thanks. Guy says, yo, you're famous. I said, I'm not famous, man. I'm not signing autographs in the airport. I'm coming home from a vacation with the wife and kids. Well, do you have electronic devices on you? I said, yeah, I got my phone right here. Do you have anything else? I said, my daughters have their iPads. You want those too? And he said, no, just yours. I said, okay, just my phone. It's right here. He said, okay, well, we want to look at your phone. I said, no, you're not getting my phone. Why not? And, anytime you respond to a government official or person or agent, and you say no to their little power surge that they're having, they get annoyed. But I did it in a respectful, calm way. I'm not trying to be confrontational, but I told them immediately, you already know that I'm an attorney. You led with that issue. And I'm not going to just give up my phone, because everything in my phone has privileged information. I have emails, I have text messages, I have files. My whole practice is in my device. You're not getting it. And so this, tit for tat went for like nearly 2 hours. How could everything in your phone be privileged? Are all your pictures privileged? Are certain apps privileged? You're talking to your mom, that's privileged? I said, yeah, my mom could be my client. Of course. I can have screenshots from what clients send me, or evidence of crimes in my photo album. That's not something that you should be able to have access to. My WhatsApp, I get groups from everywhere. Who knows what these groups are sending me, especially the ones that are overseas, because they're sending me stuff all the time. I don't know what the heck's in those group chats. So no, you're not getting any of that stuff. So to me, they were really upset by that. And so they had to go to talk to supervision. Supervision had to call somebody else. That's what took so long. Eventually they come back and they give me a legal pad and they say, write down what you think is privileged and we won't look at that. I said, brother, that's an impossibility. What are you talking about? Everything. Then everything can't be privileged. What about your contact list? I said, what do you want with the contact list? He said, we want to see the contact list. I said, if you're going to look at the contact list, you're going to give me my phone back? We'll give you the phone back, we promise. I said, okay. I wrote down at that point, you have authority to look at my contact list only. Everything else is privileged. If you look at anything beyond the contact list itself, you violated consent and you don't have authority or consent from me to look at anything else. That's not something that is required, but I did that, just to protect myself. Eventually, if they do look at my phone or did dump the whole thing or went beyond the scope of just the contact list, I could have some argument in court to say, they didn't have authority to look at that. So they look at my contact list, and then about 5 or 6 minutes later, they come back and they start asking me questions about individuals. All of these individuals, obviously, I know who they are, and I kind of understood why they're asking them because in my head, these are clients. They want to know about some of the clients that are coming from Lebanon or traveling to the Middle East a lot. And I wouldn't answer them. I said, it's none of your business. People who are in my phone are my clients, my friends, or my family. That's all you're getting out of me. I'm not going to tell you, what their business is or how I know them or what my, relationship with those individuals are. It's none of your business. And so at that point, they knew that they weren't getting much out of me and they let me walk out. And so they took me to the front and I said, is this going to happen to me again? They said, we don't know. I've got a report to fill out and, it might happen, it might not. But have a good day. Here's your device. And so at that point, I didn't truly understand the rules at the border. I knew that they had the ability to take my device. I knew that. Citizen or non-citizen, they can take your device. Non-citizens can be denied entry. So if you're not a citizen and you don't comply with them, they can send you back to where you came from.
It's an obscure law where they can just
Very
take it.
obscure. They equate the border and looking into electronic devices like looking into your luggage. They're saying you're crossing the border, you could have contraband. So they can open up your luggage to see if there's drugs or anything in there. They can go into your phone to see if there's contraband or illegal stuff in there. But really all they're doing is gathering data. The whole intent and purpose behind getting into electronic devices is broadening the data and network of data that they get from people, especially people coming from Lebanon, from Palestine, from the Middle East. They want to know who you're associating with, who you're targeting, and they want to expand that information, that data dump, so they can put it into their AI-generated software databases that they have. The government's got awesome power in terms of their databases. Other agencies can tap the shoulders of CBP and say, hey, FBI can say, Amir's coming in on this date. Stop him, get his phone. And so it's not random. In my situation, it was targeted.
Yeah. Do you think they were trying to send a message to the broader community? If we can do this to a powerful attorney, we can do it to anybody?
I think that they don't care. I think they're going to do it to whoever they want, and they're going to continue to do it. This is not new. They've been stopping people at the border from before the Obama days. Obama's era had way more stops than Trump 1. Trump 2 now is like the most. We've had a lot of seizures at the border, and I only know that now because, how much publicity I got from that border stop. Some of the national organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who is a civil rights group that fights for electronic devices and border searches and things of that nature, they have spoken to me on this issue, and they've given me the statistics of it all. And I've taught seminars now on this topic to lawyers and non-lawyers.
If you could do it all over again, if they pulled you out of line again, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently?
I would not have given the contact list even. I would have said no to that even. And I would have been able to at least push back some more, because what I do know is that when they actually seize your device, even though they have the authority to do it, their policy is it has to be done at the most extreme national security situations. And obviously, I know that I'm not the most extreme national security situation. I haven't committed any crimes and I'm not involved in any national security threats to my country. To me, I would have said no even to that. because I want to be the perfect plaintiff to change the law on this. There are different circuits in federal court. Okay. So California circuit is like different than the Michigan or Ohio. There's different parts of the country that have different court of appeals. And different parts of the country have different standards when it comes to border searches. My circuit, the Sixth Circuit, doesn't have any law on it at all. And the Supreme Court has not taken up this issue as to electronic devices at the border. The Supreme Court has ruled in Riley versus California that you must have a warrant when you're looking at somebody's phone from law enforcement when you're within the United States. But at the border, they don't have that rule. And I could have been the perfect plaintiff to take this case up so that we could have had the Supreme Court give us the guidance on where's too much or what's the standard when it comes to electronic devices and border searches. Because we don't have a standard right now. The standard is whatever the CBP policy is and what the government says it is. They believe they can do it. We believe you don't have the right to do that. Civil rights attorneys, we say, no, government, you don't have that authority. Who are you to say you can just take our devices? And so the court has to be the ultimate decider. And the Supreme Court hasn't taken up any of these cases. Every time we've gotten one of these cases to get to that point, they decline taking the case. And so, I might just drive over to Windsor, which is, 20 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, which is Canada, and come back across the border and see if they take my phone again. Maybe.
So if they take your phone, they can just take it, they won't give it back to you, and it could be 2 weeks, 2 years.
They're supposed to give it back within, I think, up to 15 days. That's what their policy is.
But what are they doing with it if they can't get into it?
They're trying to break into it. And there's technology now. I think Apple has actually given them, the jailbreak to get into devices that have, long passwords. It makes it a lot more difficult if everything's password protected, and it might take a long time. And the backlog of trying to get into these cell phones is, quite extensive. They're trying to get data at the end of the day. They're trying to get into your phone so that we can collect this information.
So when you gave your phone, in theory, they could have just gone through everything and not told you.
Very well likely could have and probably did. I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a long time. So I don't think that they got to the point where they did a full dump, because it was 5 or 6 minutes from the time the phone left my site to when it came back into my site. So logistically, I don't think that they could have had enough time to dump the whole thing.
So your advice probably is to take a burner phone if you do travel, right?
Absolutely. If you are worried about the sensitive data on your telephone, get a second device for travel purposes only that doesn't have all the sensitive data. Just your main contacts that you need to get a hold of people, your ability to, have travel documents and things like that. And then that's it. In this day and age, everything's cloud-based. You don't need to have anything stored on your device anyways.
That would have been the argument earlier, is if they did take your phone, worst case, they did it for a year, you'd be able to, it's backed up most likely. But if you're telling me they can break into it, then that's the risk right there.
Right. So they can get into it and download everything that's on your device.
Yeah.
If it's in the cloud, they're not supposed to get into it and cannot get into it. But if it's stored on your device, they can.
Any other tips for people traveling other than taking another device?
I think the biggest thing is, if you're a non-citizen, you have to be very mindful about complying if you are secondary screened. Non-citizens have different standards, and it's much more difficult for them to come through the border because they're here on visitor visas or maybe student visas or even green card holders, who are permanent residents and should be able to come into the United States as a permanent resident. However, right now we have a very litigious administration, and we've seen permanent residents, green card holders who have been detained for protest activity. And so they'll do it for any reason. They don't care. And they'll say, just deal with it in the courts, and they'll jam you up in a detention center or send you back to where you're coming from. Who wants to deal with that? So a non-citizen has to be very mindful when coming through the border about how you answer and what you say to the agents. Be honest. Don't lie. Don't ever lie to federal agents. That's a crime. Keep it short, though. Less is more. Definitely less is more.
So if somebody is put in that situation, is it going to do them any good to say, you know what, I want to get my attorney, Amir, on the phone before I do anything else? Or does that not matter at that moment?
I mean, I would be hopefully given the opportunity to speak to them. They don't necessarily have to give that person the ability to talk to their lawyer at that moment.
But that's so confusing to me. You were supposed to have that right to reach out to our attorney. That's just crazy.
I'm telling you, the border is no man's land. They're very strict at the border, and they have more rights than anything. And even if you're within 100 miles of the border, they can come in and take stuff. The whole state of Michigan falls under that rule.
Wow. Wow, that's scary. That's scary. So what's next for you? What's the next big battle? There's many that are going to come your way probably.
So, I mean, the next big battle really, I think, is to, again, have strategic litigation that I think is beneficial to civil rights issues and issues that are specifically to Muslim Americans. Would like to see my colleagues and I form some ability to have strategic litigation that pushes back on some of these executive orders that the Trump administration has implemented against our community. There is a lot of work ahead to challenge and push back on some of these issues. But I think that we're at an important time in our history. Definitely have some good momentum in terms of standing up for our rights and this conversation on the Palestinian rights as well and what they're facing, which is more so than ever. I've never seen in our history people who are standing up in solidarity with the Palestinian cause as I am now. It's quite amazing. And so I'd like to really see if there's any way to bring out this issue through strategic litigation in the courts.
Rumor has it you're thinking about doing a podcast. Is that true?
I have built the podcast room. I don't know that I'll start one yet. I don't know, but it's there. I got it. It's all. I have my microphones and cameras. We'll see.
I think you should do it. Let me know if you need any help.
Thank you.
I'll get my team to help you out. Just any final message to the community, to people who are going to face difficulties, who are going to be interrogated, to go through a lot of hostile situations?
Maybe because I'm from Dearborn and I have a strong community behind me. But if you're not from a strong community like I am, remember that you do have a community and stand up for yourself and don't look back, because there are many people that are there to help and support in any struggle that we're facing as Arabs and Muslims. We shouldn't be afraid to stand up for ourselves and speak out against issues that are important to us. I don't think that the old approach of staying under the radar is the right approach. I think you should be able to speak your mind and do it in a way that's appropriate and strategic. Don't be scared if you do get a little bit of pushback, because you have support. We have a community where people like myself will stand up and help. I'm not the only guy that's willing to do this. There are many, 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 many others in different areas, not even lawyers. I mean, you could be a journalist and that has an ability to do something, a podcaster, or any type of public help can go a long way.
Yeah. Well, look, I wanted to thank you on behalf of the community. Thank you for stepping up for us. It feels good to have you on our side and not the other side. So we appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate you, and I'm honored, man. And I'm really humbled that I'm getting the support from everybody that I am. I mean, people are shaking my hand in town. And I didn't do any of this so that I can get recognition. I just did what I thought was important. And that makes me feel a lot better about it. And so alhamdulillah, I'm humbled by that.
Alhamdulillah. It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for Sumud.